Ginger Rogers did not simply dance across a screen. She floated, sparkled, and commanded attention with a kind of effortless magic that made audiences forget the world outside the cinema. Beside Fred Astaire, she became one half of the most elegant dancing partnership Hollywood had ever seen. Their movements were so smooth, so perfectly timed, that people often believed they were watching romance itself unfold in music and silk. But the woman behind those dazzling steps lived a life far more complicated than the graceful image the public adored. Behind the gowns, the applause, and the silver screen smile, Ginger Rogers faced broken romances, difficult choices, controlling men, and scandals that followed her long after the music stopped. One of the darkest chapters involved Howard Hughes, the billionaire aviator and film mogul whose charm could open every door in Hollywood. For a time, he seemed ready to give Ginger everything: attention, luxury, promises, even a future. But what began like a grand love story soon turned into betrayal, suspicion, and one unforgettable hospital confrontation that ended their romance for good. Long before Hollywood knew her name, Ginger Rogers was born Virginia Catherine McMath on July 16, 1911. Her arrival brought joy to her mother, Lela, who had already known the pain of losing a child. From the beginning, Layla treated her daughter as something precious, and that fierce bond would shape Ginger's entire life. Ginger was not raised as a quiet little girl, meant to disappear into the background. She was surrounded by performance, ambition, and theatre lights. At first, Ginger imagined a more ordinary life. She once thought about becoming a school teacher, but fate had placed her too close to the stage for that dream to last. Her mother worked in the entertainment world, and young Ginger often found herself waiting backstage, watching performers rehearse, listening to music, and studying the strange power of an audience. While other children might have grown bored, Ginger was captivated. She sang along, copied the dancers, and moved in the shadows, as though the theatre already belonged to her. It did not take long for people to notice. At just 14 years old, Ginger entered a Charleston dance contest and stunned everyone. She did not merely win, she announced herself. That victory opened the first real door in her career, pushing her toward vaudeville, where talent had to be sharp, quick, and impossible to ignore. Soon, she had her own touring act, called Ginger Rogers and the Redheads. She was still a teenager, but she was already learning how to survive in front of strangers, how to win them over, and how to keep smiling even when life behind the curtain was uncertain. Then came her first great romantic mistake. At 17, Ginger married entertainer Jack Pepper. He was charming, musical, and already connected to her past in a slightly scandalous way. He had once dated her cousin. Together, they created a stage act with the perfect show business name, Ginger and Pepper. It sounded cute, clever, and unforgettable. The marriage, however, was not built to last. Within 10 months, it was over. Ginger was young, ambitious, and suddenly free again. But instead of letting heartbreak slow her down, she moved forward with the same confidence that had carried her through every dance step. New York was waiting. Broadway was waiting. Hollywood, though she did not yet know it, was waiting too. And somewhere ahead, a man named Fred Astaire was about to enter her life. After her first marriage collapsed, Ginger Rogers could easily have become another young performer swallowed by disappointment. But Ginger was not the kind of woman who stayed still for long. She had already learned one of show business's hardest lessons. Applause was never guaranteed, and sympathy did not pay the bills. If she wanted a future, she would have to chase it herself. So she went to New York. The city was loud, hungry, and overflowing with ambitious people who believed they were one lucky break away from becoming famous. Ginger was one of them, but she had something many others did not. She had timing, she had charm, and most importantly, she had the confidence of a girl who had already stood in front of audiences and survived. At first, she found work singing on the radio. It was not the grand dream, but it gave her a voice, a name, and a place in the entertainment world. Then came Broadway. For a young woman with stage lights in her blood, Broadway was more than a job. It was proof that she belonged. In 1929, Ginger appeared in the musical Top Speed, and almost immediately, people began to notice her. She had energy without seeming desperate, beauty without seeming fragile, and a natural comic brightness that made her hard to forget. After only a short time, another opportunity arrived, a role in Girl Crazy. That production would change the direction of her life. On the set of Girl Crazy, Ginger met a man who was already respected for his elegance, discipline, and almost impossible precision. Fred Astaire. At the time, neither of them could have fully understood what their meeting would mean. They were simply two talented performers crossing paths in a busy theatre world. But history was quietly arranging something extraordinary. Fred Astaire was not like other dancers. He demanded perfection from himself and from everyone around him. Every step had to land properly. Every movement had to feel light, even when it had taken hours of exhausting rehearsal. To some, that made him difficult. To others, it made him brilliant. Ginger, whether she knew it or not, had exactly the qualities needed to stand beside him. She could keep up. Soon, Hollywood called. Ginger signed with RKO Pictures, and her career began to move with incredible speed. Her first major film with the studio, Flying Down to Rio, paired her with Fred Astaire. They were not meant to be the center of the entire film, but once audiences saw them together, something happened. Their chemistry was impossible to ignore. They did not simply dance beside each other. They seemed to speak through movement. Fred brought polish, control, and elegance. Ginger brought warmth, wit, and a glowing screen presence that softened his precision. Together, they made dancing look like conversation, flirtation, and challenge all at once. Audiences were enchanted. Studio executives quickly realized they had found something rare. Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire became a dream team, the kind Hollywood could build films around. Their partnership helped define a golden era of musicals. To viewers, they looked effortless. To critics, they looked perfect. To fans, they looked as though they belonged together, both on screen and off. And that was where the rumours began. Some people whispered that Ginger and Fred were secretly in love. Others insisted the opposite, that behind the polished smiles, they irritated each other terribly. The truth was more complicated and perhaps more interesting. Their work required trust, discipline, patience, and the ability to hide exhaustion beneath glamour. Whether they were tired, annoyed, or under pressure, the audience never saw it. That was their genius. Ginger Rogers was no longer just a talented girl from vaudeville. She was now a Hollywood star, admired by millions and watched closely by every gossip column in town. But fame brought its own kind of danger. The brighter her career became, the more powerful men were drawn into her orbit. One of them was Howard Hughes. And when he entered Ginger's life, he did not arrive quietly. By the time Howard Hughes moved seriously into Ginger Rogers' life, she was no longer an uncertain young performer trying to prove herself. She was a star. She had danced her way into the hearts of millions, worked beside Fred Astaire, and become one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. Men admired her, studios needed her, audiences adored her. But Howard Hughes was not the sort of man who admired quietly. He was rich, brilliant, daring, and dangerously used to getting what he wanted. He flew planes, made films, bought land, built empires, and surrounded himself with beautiful women. In Hollywood, his name carried the smell of money and trouble. When Hughes turned his attention towards Ginger, it was not a gentle courtship. It was grand, intense, and impossible to ignore. He had pursued her before, but Ginger had not been easy to win. She had her own principles, her own pride, and above all, her mother. Lela Rogers was not merely a parent in Ginger's life. She was an advisor, protector, companion, and sometimes the strongest voice in the room. Any man who wanted Ginger had to understand that Lela came with her. Howard Hughes, unfortunately, was not a man who enjoyed sharing control. At first, his attention must have seemed flattering. He offered Ginger a world of luxury few women could imagine. He showed her beautiful properties, promised her a mansion, and gave her the kind of dazzling gifts that could make even Hollywood stars pause. One of the most memorable was an emerald engagement ring, large enough to announce not only romance but possession. Ginger accepted the ring, but she did not surrender herself. Despite Hughes's wealth and charm, she remained careful. She believed strongly in marriage, respectability, and self-control. She continued to live with her mother and refused to behave like a woman already owned by a man. If Hughes wanted to take her out, he often had to deal with Lela first. To some men, that might have been amusing. To Hughes, it became an irritation. Slowly, the romance darkened. Ginger began to feel watched. She suspected her phone was being listened to. She worried that people were following her. These fears may have sounded dramatic, but with Howard Hughes, they were not impossible. He had a reputation for obsession, secrecy, and control. The more powerful he became, the more he seemed to believe that money could buy not only privacy, but other people's loyalty. Ginger was not foolish. She could feel when admiration began turning into possession. There was also the matter of her career. During the 1930s, she had been one of RKO's brightest stars, especially when paired with Fred Astaire. But Ginger was careful about the roles she accepted. She had strong moral beliefs and did not want to appear in anything she considered improper or cheap. When the studio offered her Kitty Foyle, she hesitated. The story involved difficult, controversial themes, and Ginger was shocked by parts of the novel. To her, the material felt too bold. Yet, the role also offered something important, a chance to prove she was more than Fred Astaire's dancing partner. She could be dramatic. She could carry a serious story. She could stand alone. While Ginger was weighing her future, Hughes was becoming harder to ignore and harder to trust. The romance that had once glittered with gifts and promises began to feel like a trap lined with velvet. Then came the moment that broke everything. One evening, Ginger refused to accompany Hughes to an appointment. It was a small refusal, but to a man like Hughes, even small refusals could feel like insults. Around the same time, Ginger received humiliating news. Hughes's car had reportedly been seen outside another actress's home more than once. For Ginger, the meaning was clear. The man who wanted to control her had not even been loyal to her. When Hughes called afterwards, expecting her attention, Ginger was no longer interested in playing the patient fiancée. She had endured the suspicion, the pressure, and the arrogance. Now betrayal had been added to the list. But before the confrontation could fully unfold, another phone call came. Howard Hughes had been in a terrible car accident. When Ginger Rogers heard that Howard Hughes had been badly injured in a car accident, anger did not stop her from going to the hospital. Whatever had happened between them, Hughes had once been the man who promised her a future. She needed to see him with her own eyes. What she found was shocking. The powerful, confident billionaire who had once filled every room with arrogance was lying wounded and bandaged. His face had been badly hurt, and the accident had left him looking far less untouchable than usual. For a brief moment, anyone else might have softened. But Ginger had not come as a frightened fiancée desperate for forgiveness. She came as a woman who had finally seen the truth. Hughes, even in that condition, tried to turn the blame onto her. He suggested that her refusal to accompany him had upset him so deeply that it led to the crash. It was a cruel move. Instead of accepting responsibility, he placed the weight of his reckless emotions on Ginger's shoulders. But Ginger Rogers was not as fragile as he imagined. She had spent years in a business where charming men smiled while trying to control everything around them. She recognized manipulation when she heard it, so she did not break down, she did not beg, she did not apologize. Instead, Ginger changed the subject to what truly mattered, his betrayal. She had heard enough. She knew about the other woman. She knew about the car seen where it should not have been. And she knew that the man who demanded loyalty from her had offered very little of it in return. Then Ginger did something unforgettable. She brought out the jewelry Hughes had given her. Every glittering gift, every expensive symbol of his affection, every beautiful object that had once made his promises look serious. She returned them. The emerald engagement ring went back too. It was not simply a rejection of a marriage proposal. It was the end of his power over her. For Howard Hughes, a man used to buying devotion, it was a humiliating defeat. For Ginger, it was freedom. And freedom brought her back to the one place where she had always been strongest, the screen. Around this time, Ginger made one of the boldest decisions of her career. She accepted the role in Kitty Foyle, despite her earlier discomfort with the story's subject matter. It was a risk, but it gave her the chance to show a different side of herself. Audiences had loved her as the bright, witty dancing partner beside Fred Astaire. Now she wanted them to see the actress beneath the glamour. They did. Her performance proved that Ginger Rogers was not dependent on music, gowns, or a famous partner. She could carry emotion, drama, and heartbreak on her own. The role brought her one of the greatest honors in Hollywood, the Academy Award for Best Actress. It was the perfect answer to anyone who had underestimated her. But Ginger's life was never only triumph. Behind her discipline and elegance, she carried firm beliefs that shaped every decision she made. She did not drink heavily, did not smoke, and lived with a kind of strict self-control that separated her from many stars of her generation. Her faith was central to her life, and it influenced how she viewed illness, medicine, and suffering. That faith, however, also had a painful cost. Ginger lived with diabetes, a serious condition that required care. Yet because of her beliefs, she was often reluctant to rely on medical treatment. As the years passed, her health became one of the quiet battles hidden behind the public image. She had survived Hollywood pressure, gossip, failed romances, and the demands of fame, but her body carried a struggle that applause could not erase. In 1995, Ginger Rogers passed away at the age of 83. By then, the world she had helped create had changed completely. The golden age of Hollywood was gone. The grand musicals, the shimmering gowns, the perfect black and white dance numbers. They had become history. But Ginger remained unforgettable. She was more than Fred Astaire's partner. She was more than Howard Hughes's almost wife. She was more than a beautiful face in a sparkling dress. Ginger Rogers was a survivor, a worker, a star who made difficulty look effortless. She danced through pressure, heartbreak, scandal, and expectation with a smile that made the world believe everything was easy. But perhaps that was her greatest performance, because Ginger Rogers did not just dance backwards in high heels. She lived under pressure and still made it look graceful. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who loves the hidden truths behind Hollywood's golden age. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.